Even as U.S. Iran talks teeter on the edge of collapse, is Washington now quietly lining up pressure on a second front, this time just 150 kilometers off Florida's coast? While the world watches Hormuz, is Trump dialing up the heat on another of Putin's allies in the Caribbean, turning Cuba into the next test case for maximum pressure? With U.S. spy flights suddenly surging off Cuba's shores, is Washington merely mapping a crisis, or rehearsing the opening moves of another confrontation while Iran remains unresolved? As Havana warns it has absolutely no diesel left, are we looking at a slow-motion fuel collapse triggered by market forces, or by deliberate U.S. pressure on Cuba's last remaining lifelines? As Iran-U.S. ceasefire talks stall in a dangerous limbo, critics say Trump appears to be preparing the ground for another flashpoint, this time centered on energy-starved Cuba. On May 13th, Cuba's energy minister bluntly admitted the country has absolutely no diesel left, signaling that the island's fuel crisis has tipped into outright emergency. Vicente de Laro Levi described the situation as critical, with Havana enduring power cuts that stretched 20 to 22 hours a day in some areas, leaving only brief windows of electricity. He said only limited gas from Cuba's own wells is still feeding the grid, while fuel oil tanks that normally keep power plants running now sit effectively empty. De Laro Levi insisted Cuba is willing to buy fuel from any willing seller, but blamed U.S. sanctions and pressure for scaring off key suppliers who previously kept the island's lights on. Notably, officials admit Cuba has not received major fuel shipments since January 2026, a gap that helps explain why reserves have now been run down to almost nothing. Vicente de Laro Levi said, and I quote, "The sum of the different types of fuel, crude oil, fuel oil, of which we have absolutely none, diesel, of which we have absolutely none. I am being repetitive. The only thing we have is gas from our wells, where production has grown." Unquote. Meanwhile, President Miguel Diaz-Canel has described U.S. energy sanctions as a genocidal blockade, accusing Washington of using fuel as a weapon against Cuba's civilian population. Havana claims U.S. pressure has forced traditional partners like Venezuela and Mexico to slash their shipments, leaving Cuba with no easy way to plug the sudden supply gap. Notably, Trump has openly spoken about wanting regime change in communist-run Cuba, fueling opposition claims that the energy crisis is part of a broader push to destabilize the government. Extended blackouts have disrupted hospitals across the island, forcing critical wards onto emergency generators and backup systems not designed to run almost around the clock. Schools, transport networks, and government offices are staggering schedules, trying to squeeze operations into the few hours when power is available, as outages now span both day and night. Tourism, one of Cuba's last sources of hard currency, is also taking a hit, as visitors endure sweltering hotel rooms, failed air conditioning, and unreliable services during their stays. Cuban officials warn that if power cuts drag on, the strain on daily life could spark wider social unrest, arriving just as inflation, shortages, and low wages are already biting hard. The fuel crisis coincides with a sharp spike in U.S. intelligence flights near Cuba since early February, according to open flight tracking data and military observers. Reports say at least 25 reconnaissance missions by manned aircraft and drones have flown close to Havana and Santiago in recent months, a tempo higher than usual peacetime patrols. Many of those sorties have reportedly come within roughly 40 miles of Cuba's coastline, a range well suited to vacuum up detailed signals, radar, and communications intelligence. The aircraft mix has included P-8A Poseidon patrol jets, RC-135V rivet joint electronic intelligence planes, and high-altitude MQ-4C Triton spy drones, all designed for persistent surveillance. Analysts note similar reconnaissance patterns appeared before U.S. actions in Venezuela and Iran under Trump, when intelligence flights ramped up ahead of sanctions escalations and limited strikes. In Venezuela, recon flights surged after U.S. forces hit a vessel allegedly linked to Nicolas Maduro's networks, a reminder that spy missions can be both a precursor and a follow-up to pressure moves. In the Iran theater, a broader mix of U.S. and Israeli aircraft surveilled coasts and key sites before joint operations, suggesting Washington likes to build a thick intelligence picture before acting. Now, with the same families of aircraft turning up off Cuba, many are asking whether this is just cautious mapping of a crisis, or the early echo of a familiar escalation pattern aimed at another U.S. adversary.